Hello, thank you for watching There Will Always Be Another Book. Today I'm talking about a book that I just finished last night, which is Murakami's Kafka on the Shore. This is the second Murakami book that I've read. First was Norwegian Wood, and just rapid fire, my rating for this book was 3 out of 4 stars. I didn't like it as much as Norwegian Wood, and there are quite a few criticisms that I have about this book. But I will get into those after I do a quick spoiler-free plot summary, just in case it sounds interesting to you and you want to read it. But most of this video will be me assuming you've read it. Pretty much, Kafka on the Shore follows 2 different main characters. The first is Kafka Tamura, who's a 15-year-old runaway. He's left his father for kind of ambiguous reasons at the start. Kafka's mother and daughter abandoned them when Kafka was about 4, and so 11 years later, Kafka is also kind of running away. And he's being guided by a boy named Crow. I think that's like the name of the very first chapter. Yeah, well, the boy named Crow. And yeah, so after Kafka runs away to a sort of remote-ish location, he comes across this library and he meets a library assistant named Oshima and the owner of the library, Saiki, and through various reasons he becomes integrated into the library, and that's where a lot of the plot happens. The other main character, and the book is set in chapters, and every chapter alternates between Kafka and this character, whose name is Nakata. And Nakata is an older man who is, for various reasons that happen early on in the novel, he becomes mentally disabled, but not severely. He's still able to talk and have a conversation. However, he can't read, he can't write. He's very peculiar. He has a limited vocabulary, and the book often plays on the fact that he can't pronounce big words, but he's, like I said, he's peculiar and quirky, and he can talk to cats. That's one of the big draws. It's he gets his government subsidy so that he can live, but his side hustle is that he finds people's missing cats, and it's kind of funny and appealing at the start. Some very spoilery things happen where he ends up getting intertwined with Kafka's storyline, and then that's pretty much the end of what I could say without spoilers. I'm not going to do a plot breakdown after the spoilers because that's sort of, I guess, just a waste of time. If what I've said sounds interesting, then go check it out. If you've read Murakami before and you're interested in this concept of like magical realism, then it might be interesting to you. The magical realism, surrealism of which Murakami is known for. So I'm going to jump into a couple of my biggest criticisms. The first is that this edition that I have, the vintage edition, is 505, if I remember correctly, pages long. Yeah, this book it felt like it was missing at least a fifth of the book at the end. That's how abruptly it stops. Many things that are set up, alluded to, very strongly referenced, it just goes nowhere, or it feels really underdeveloped. And so I'm going to talk about a couple of these things. Really, aside from that general criticism of the book is too short and it felt like Murakami just didn't know how to end the book and so just ended it. The big criticism I had was the character Oshima, who is the library assistant, the liaison with Kafka when he comes to the library. And so the thing with Oshima and the personal struggle that he goes through is we find out in a really bizarre scene, I don't mean bizarre like magical, I mean bizarre like so janky and bad that I actually thought it was parody. We find out that Oshima is a man and presents as a man, but is biologically a female. And so it's like a really interesting and fascinating idea of the personal struggles that a person can go through. He's dealing with problems of like not feeling comfortable in his body, feeling like a broken, warped shell. I don't remember the exact language that he used. And, the scene that... From this point, we're talking spoilers. The scene with the two ladies coming in and just grilling this library for these reasons, it really felt... I was like, are we serious? Like, is this what's happening? And so I kind of tolerated that scene as a sort of janky way to introduce this complex with Oshima. But really, I'm getting to the end of the book. I'm really enjoying this book. We reach the end and it's just nothing happens. There's nothing interesting that happens to Oshima. Like, there are some other things, just still related to Oshima, and back on the topic of things being unresolved, there's a character in the book, I think it's Colonel Sanders who says this, who literally not only mentions Chekhov, but also explains the concept of a Chekhov's gun. And I'm not a really big marginalia person, but I actually did in this book because I was noticing some correlations that I wanted to keep track of. And one of the first things that I wrote was when they were talking about... Oh, it's right here. So if a pistol appears in a story, eventually it's got to be fired. And I did a little asterisk and just wrote... Oshima's hemophilia. Yeah, the blood condition that he has. And I was like, that's such an obvious Chekhov's gun. And nothing happened in that regard. And there are some other notes that I took. I'm gonna... Yeah, because, the reason I've paused is because there are some cool things, like I still did like this book, and there are some cool things that I want to talk about, but I want to get over a couple of other criticisms. First, the one that I'm thinking of is just that I was sort of not confused, but like conflicted with how I felt Murakami dealt with Hoshino. So Hoshino is a young lorry truck driver who tags along with Nakata and kind of helps him reach a destination, drives him places, talks, does all the reading and writing for him. And Hoshino is an interesting character and really gets along well with Nagata, but there's this great sort of moment, or this great development where Hoshino kind of, like, he even says this in conversation. He's like, wow, Nakata, you can't read, you can't write. I can read and I can write, but I just don't. And Hoshino goes through this whole journey of like, going and seeing these French avant-garde films. He's watching, he's listening to classical music and he's reading about the history of Beethoven and he's getting very interested and he's becoming cultured, and that's really important to him. And he's noticing that, he's noticing how his life is changing for the better. But at the same part, he's also dealing with this surrogate relationship with Nakata, the surrogate relationship is that Nakata is like a stand-in for Hoshino's grandfather, who did a lot of great things for him, but because Hoshino was young, he never really thanked him, and his grandfather ended up going senile at old age, and he died. And that's its own sort of separate interesting tragedy. But the end of the book, after Nakata has died and Hoshino is left alone, it really pushes him towards becoming another Nakata. He starts talking like him. He can even talk to cats by the end of it, And I think the last line, or one of his last lines, is sort of said in a style that's like, oh, Hoshino doesn't have that great a memory, and it's just straight up that he's kind of become the Buddha's servant shining the shoes, and he's kind of taking over after the Buddha's gone. He's reaching his own form of enlightenment, which is interesting, but it does conflict with the whole him becoming cultured, because presumably if he goes down the Nagata path and becomes like him, then he's going to lose all of that. So yeah, I don't really, it's not that I was conflicted or confused, but it's not that either of those two words are the correct way of describing it. It's just that I was surprised that he made all of this character development in one area and all of this character development in a different area, and really just chose one of them and abandoned the other one by the end. So those were the three things that I was really kind of conflicted about, and really bumped it down to a 3 out of 4 for me. I do want to talk about some of the cool things that I liked though. So still, it's a Murakami novel, and I really like Norwegian Wood, so I like his way of writing, and I just have a general like for Murakami. I guess some of the techniques that he used in this book, the one standout one to me was I really liked that with the two alternating chapters, the two alternating storylines, he makes the time disjointed. So for a lot of the book, Kafka's storyline is about 2 or 3 days ahead of what Nakata's doing. And I didn't notice this until quite late. After I started taking notes, I started noting what day it was when people would mention it. And it's a really cool thing because it kind of disguises the correlations of what Nakata is doing and how it's directly impacting what Kafka is doing, or the people around Kafka, for the first time read. So for your virginal read, you're not going to notice the correlations of the time it stormed very heavily, and then later on when Nakata turns the stone and that's what causes the storm. When you read again, I imagine you'll see a lot more of those combinations because you'll be aware of this time disparity. But for a first time reading, it was really subtle at disguising it, because you're still finding connections. Like I remember making a note somewhere about how one of Kafka's chapters ends with him falling asleep, and then the start of Nakata's chapter ends with him waking up. And it's such an obvious, subtle thing, right? But it's not only does it connect them, but it tricks you into being like, oh, Kafka just went to sleep, Nakata just woke up, they're in sync. But you realize that they're not in sync later on. And one more positive that I really liked, when Kafka is walking through the forest and he's going to try and find this place, and he runs into the two soldiers who are the two chords that made Kafka on the Shore so special. And that's a sort of like the way that Murakami uses metaphors and symbolism in that way is really appealing to me. Like I really got a bit turned off when the book really stresses that just everything's a metaphor, and it's a little bit like, we have a case of ambiguitis happening. But I really did like that those two soldiers were these focal points for Saiki when she first went, and they kind of inspired that interesting music composition element of Kafka on the Shore, the song. But anyway, back to Kafka walking through the forest and getting to the village. I really liked that when he got into the village and he's sussing it out, he's sussing out the house, he sees that there's a television, and on the television everything is like fuzzy except they're playing the movie My Favorite Things. And this can be a little bit like, why? Until you realize that when Kafka's walking into the forest, he's listening to his music, and I remembered that the last piece of music he was listening to was Coltrane's rendition of My Favorite Things, which comes from The Sound of Music. And I like that as a sort of subtle Easter egg for people, because he doesn't explicitly mention that My Favorite Things, he doesn't make that connection in the book. He talks about 2 other songs from The Sound of Music, but the way I saw that was it was almost like intentionally avoiding talking about My Favorite Things. But it was a cool little like interaction and connection of this TV, which is sort of weirdly out of place in this forest basin ghost town, and the last human thing that Kafka was listening to before he came to this place. So it showed that even though he was here, there was still like some signs of him maybe getting out. But yeah, that was another cool thing that I liked. I didn't want to end. I didn't want to end on a bad note, but I just looked at my notes and I saw again something to rant about, which was there are times when some of the symbolism was so on the nose that I think I actually wrote red herring question mark in my marginalia. And probably the worst one for me was there's a time where Nakata and Hoshino are trying to describe the entrance stone to people, and Nakata is like, oh, it's this big, and Murakami twice in 2 pages, and the 2 pages are next to each other so you can like look at it and see both of them. He describes it as about the size of an LP record. And I'm like, come on, man, did you have to say that? Anyway, I think I've made my feelings on the book pretty clear. But maybe, I don't want to end on a sour note. I want to say that I really did. I was enjoying this book a lot until it just got to the end. And, it could even be like, I wouldn't be surprised if it was between a fifth and a quarter of the book. That's how much feels missing to me. It just ends so weirdly abruptly, and I just realized I didn't even talk about Sakura being underdeveloped, but it's okay. I hope you enjoyed some of my ideas and thoughts. I'm curious because I'm worried there's some things that I'm missing. I really, really loved Norwegian Wood, but I know that it's different to Murakami's normal style, so, I figured that Kafka on the Shore would be different anyway, but I am curious to see what you guys thought about this book, and if there's anything I missed or anything that I misinterpreted, I'm more than willing to let me know, and I'll read it, and hopefully I'll learn something. But thanks again for watching. Remember, there will always be another book, so keep on reading, and I'll see you in the next video.